Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. So happy to be presenting at LabNConf. I have a presentation for you all today that I'd like to get into. So we'll begin. I want to talk about Bitcoin as a humanitarian defense system today. And primarily, I want to talk about it as a defense against Big Brother and this creeping phenomenon we have in the world today where more and more of what you are and what you have and what you do is subject to the spying eyes of others, whether they be governments, corporations, third parties. And really, this was a future, a dystopia that was once painted by George Orwell, something that people only thought would be a fantasy, this idea that we could be living in this future world where nothing would be your own except a few cubic centimeters inside your skull. And that was really the driving idea behind something like 1984. The reality, though, is that that society is emerging around the world, and oftentimes it's not primarily done by governments, particularly, or done by corporations. A lot of times, people do it to themselves. So if you think about who's driving the knife of the panopticon, it's not always someone else. Oftentimes it's you. When you willingly trade your privacy and freedom for convenience, you feed your data to a growing Big Brother. If you think about what Big Brother is, or what surveillance capitalism is, or what any of these fears people have are about losing their privacy and giving power to others, it's really this trade-off that you willingly make. Where you give up some of your privacy and freedom for convenience, speed, comfort. And that is the trade-off we're going to have to consider today. And that's a trade-off that I think Bitcoin can help us fight. I want to talk a little bit about the world's largest country because this is where the world's most data is being collected, per capita and net, is in China, where you have hundreds of millions of people who are participating willingly in an incredible system, actually, that uses big data analysis and predictive AI algorithms to provide incredible services to the population. So, for example, this person here, uses Wechat to do literally everything, to book hotel rooms, do all their banking, do all their health, medicine, buy food, transportation. You could do it all in one app, right? The thing is, again, you're making that trade-off of trading off your privacy and convenience for trading off your privacy and freedom for comfort and convenience, right? And what that allows is social engineering, right? So the Chinese Communist Party knows that citizens are going to be willing to make that trade-off, at least most of them. And with that in mind, they're starting to build out this thing called social credit. Now, it's been very overhyped, and it's not exactly what you read about in the news, but certainly the idea is there. The idea of the government is that people will be graded not just on their financial behavior, but also on their political beliefs and on their identity, whether or not they are perhaps a sexual minority or perhaps a particular religious minority. These things would play a factor into what kind of loan you could get, what kind of school you could get into, et cetera. It's not architected like that all over China. That's largely a myth. However, there are many initiatives within China where the government at both the sort of local and federal level is sort of seeking to do this, is seeking to take social engineering to the next step in a digital sense, right? And you see lots of examples. There's cities in China where jaywalkers get identified on a big screen with their name and ID number, so that it discourages people from stepping out of line. There's also something called debt shaming, where you might be looking down at your phone on your Wechat, and on the little map, someone might appear, and that person has a bad credit score, a bad social credit score, a bad citizen score, right? They might not be very loyal, right? So the app shows that to you, and then you don't want to go near that person because, if you interact with that person, your score could go down too. So again, this is largely patchwork across China. There's no one system, but there's a big driving effort towards the government having this kind of control over people And largely, again, it's not by violence. It's self-imposed. It's sort of a chilling effect, which is much more powerful. And they're sort of like aiding and abetting this with just massive amounts of spyware. So China's going to have 500 million surveillance cameras by next year. That's one for every 2 to 3 people, right? And when they look out through those cameras, whether it's on a street or on someone's face in the form of a Google Glasses type thing, they see something like this, where they see not only every person, but every car. And they just have this sense of omniscience that would make Orwell blush, I'm sure. And this past year, it's been really augmented by the fight against coronavirus, right? So, back in March and April, and this has evolved since then, but there were many places where, like, when you were under lockdown in China, you had to show a particular color to get to your apartment building, get out of your apartment building, go to work, etc., go to a market. A lot of these things have lingered. So, there's an old Soviet joke along the lines of, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary order. So a lot of these temporary things that happened in China due to coronavirus, continue to last in society. And I think a lot of people there know this, and they're torn about it. So there's a quote from a young Chinese woman here who said, "Whether we're constructing a future society or a cage for ourselves, I don't know." So there's a big tension in China right now over this. And what the government wants to do is make what they call a harmonious society. But reality is, there's no such thing as a harmonious society. And when they try to smooth everything out and make everything look perfect, what they actually do is crush a lot of people underneath, right? So a harmonious society that they're building is reliant on these. Now, this is a satellite photo of a prison camp in Western China, where there's millions of Muslims in prison camps. And they continue to be interned in these camps, despite what the CCP has said internationally. In fact, another large camp was just found the other day. So you have like a sort of like, very fascist ethnic minority cleansing program happening right now. And, this is very tied in with these centralized efforts to be omniscient and know everything about society. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this Chinese tech is being spread around the world. So, if you're worried about this sort of centralization of data and what it can do in the hands of tyrants or powerful people, you should be worried no matter where you live. I mean, the countries in red here were found in a New York Times investigation to be buying Chinese surveillance technology. We're talking in the confines and context of our conversation today, and this is 18 months old, so there's more now. But Mexico, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, there's more. There's countries that are buying wholesale Chinese surveillance technology and implementing it among their citizenry. So this matters for this audience in a big, big way. And Yuval Noah Harari, the historian, he has said that if you dislike the idea of living in this digital dictatorship, where we see where the slippery slope goes, then the most important contribution you can make is to find ways to prevent too much data from being concentrated in too few hands. He says they won't be easy tasks, but achieving them may be the best safeguard of democracy. So if we want to protect rule by the people as opposed to rule by the one or the few, we have to find a way to fight the centralization of data, right? What is going to be our humanitarian defense system, right? And I would argue to you that we need to focus first and foremost on finance and payments and money. For the simple fact that today cash is disappearing. Cash has played a very important role in society, in modern society, both as a savings mechanism where you could withdraw, banknotes and hold on to them, and you would be partially protected, from the government seizing or freezing your funds. And perhaps more importantly, as a privacy mechanism where you can make transactions without the other parties knowing much about you. Well, that's disappearing. As of about 18 months ago, these were these numbers. So these are smaller now, but 42% of transactions in the United Kingdom are done with cash. Less than a third in the United States. Only 20% in Sweden, 14% in South Korea. And in many urban areas around the world, whether it's Caracas or Beijing or Stockholm, the numbers are way, way, way lower. So, the cashless world is already here for a lot of people. We have to think about what that means. And there's a political backdrop here where world authorities, whether they be these alphabet soup organizations, right, like the World Health Organization, or sovereign governments, have begun a war on cash. And one of the props they used this year was that banknotes would be dirty. And you know what? Maybe it's obvious that like paper money is dirty in some way, and that in the future we'll be laughing that we use these things. but they play such a vital social role, and we have to figure out what's going to take their place. Otherwise, we're going to be facing a very difficult civil liberties challenge, because you have to think about what the implications are of a cashless society where all money is digitally centralized, right? You have to think about what happens when we lose financial privacy. You have to think about the powers that states and corporations gain over you as you make that trade-off and give up your privacy and freedom for comfort, convenience, speed. Because what you buy and sell says more about you than your words. Your spend is more valuable than your text message history. I'd rather see your credit card history if I'm trying to figure out what you do, right? And again, if we think about the role of cash with regard to civil liberties, when you bought something with banknotes or coins, think about it. Like, the merchant doesn't know anything about you. They don't know your email address, your purchase history, your home address. And that was fine. And that was the way the world worked. But now, ever since the advent of credit cards, now, of course, with mobile money and swipes, and one day a chip under your skin, when you make a transaction, that information is revealed to all kinds of third parties. And this opens the door for not just censorship and surveillance, but also, as we saw in China, social engineering. So again, how are we going to protect ourselves? What's going to be our humanitarian defense system against the panopticon? Could we have a different kind of cashless society? Is a decentralized financial system without third parties and controlling authorities possible? And if we look at the evolution of money, as it went, whether you believe it came from barter or whether humans created it, the fact is the physical manifestation of money has gone from, things that are basically bare instruments like shells, coins, and even banknotes, to the digital world, where they are intimately tied with our personal identification stack, right? Well, now we have another way out in Bitcoin, right? So in this peer-to-peer electronic cash system, we have our defense system. We have our way that we're going to protect humanity in many ways. And it's very simple. I mean, any other way you want to make a digital payment today goes through all these third parties, your bank, their bank, all kinds of payment processors. Meanwhile, in Bitcoin, a transaction is completely peer-to-peer. There's just a global competition in the middle that makes the payment. But that group of miners around the world, they can't censor your transaction, and they're not collecting information about you. We think about this concept of democratizing money. I think it's going to stand in several hundred years. People will look back in time and consider that the invention of democratized, decentralized money is on par with the invention of decentralized government in the form of democracy, and in the invention of decentralized information in the form of the internet. I mean, here we're really taking access to money, opening it to everybody with the Bitcoin system, and basically, making it possible for the same set of rules to apply to everybody. And that, I think, is a really big deal from a humanitarian perspective as well. In addition to the privacy stuff, here we have the first decentralized digital scarce asset in history. And that scarcity is so important. I mean, here we have something that approximates some of the good properties that gold had, where basically, you couldn't create more of it. Well, now we've made a digital representation of that, where there is a certain limit to how much exists, and no one can change the monetary policy, no matter rich they are or how powerful they are. So no matter if you're a billionaire or one of these corporations that's buying up tons of Bitcoin right now, they can't change the rules. They can't prevent me from using Bitcoin. They can't prevent you from using Bitcoin. So this monetary network is, I think, a humanitarian defense system in many different ways. I think it really helps, in terms of fighting this phenomenon we have of, as we go throughout our day and make our payments, we're like revealing all this information to everybody. It can help there. It can help there eventually, but it also helps in so many other ways. And if you think about, again, this idea of scarcity, there's a reason why gold is so valuable for humans, because it has held its purchasing power over the millennia, right? In 350 BC Babylon, 1 ounce of gold got you 350 loaves of bread. Well, guess what? In 2020 AD San Francisco, near where I live, 1 ounce of gold still gets you around 350 loaves of bread. So it's held its purchasing power because alchemy doesn't exist. No one can create more gold. And lo and behold, Satoshi Nakamoto created a digital representation of that. And the rallying cry for Bitcoin buried in the Genesis block was precisely this. And, it wasn't actually about the privacy stuff. It was really the genesis was this idea of, could we create an alternative to central banks? Could we create a system where the rich who run the world couldn't bail themselves out at the expense of everybody else, right? And that's such an incredibly powerful thing, but so few of us on this planet know about this. I mean, perhaps per capita, it might be higher in Latin America than in other places. I'd certainly be willing to believe that. But still, I mean, you're talking maybe 60, 70, 80 million people around the world out of 7.5 billion. So we're talking about 1%, less than 1% of people who've actually meaningfully used this incredible new technology. And we think about how many people such a thing could potentially help. I mean, consider that 2 billion people aren't banked or don't have an ID. And in a lot of cases, there are governments or corporations who don't want to give them a bank account or an ID. There's a reason. Maybe they are a Muslim minority group living in Burma. Maybe they are a Tibetan group living in China. Maybe they are a Christian group living in Egypt. I mean, I could think of many, many reasons. There are also reasons why people are being debanked, right? Already, people who have bank accounts are being debanked. Look at protesters in Hong Kong. Look at protesters in Belarus. Look at protesters in Nigeria, right? Three, very important countries around the world currently in the middle of democratic revolutions, one way or the other. People are being debanked, right? So when you don't have a bank account, a lot of your freedoms get melted away. So Bitcoin can be the bank account for those people who otherwise wouldn't have one. And then we talk about these, as I'm mentioning, this idea of like political oppression. Don't forget that 4 billion people live under authoritarianism. I mean, think, maybe this isn't quite as prevalent in Latin America, maybe perhaps as in Africa or Asia. But I mean, think of all the people in Venezuela and Cuba. With Bitcoin, we have this alternative model where Xi Jinping can't micro-track you so easily. Putin can't freeze your bank account if you're using Bitcoin. The Burmese junta can't delete you if you're a religious minority they don't like. The US can't sanction you. And of course, Chavismo can't hyperinflate you. And again, going back to this idea of scarcity and a predictable issuance and a monetary policy that's independent, I mean, I couldn't think of a more powerful reason to explain why this is important than the example of Venezuela. And at the Human Rights Foundation, we've been doing work with Venezuela since our inception. We were founded by a Venezuelan activist, and I've personally been doing work on Venezuelan civil liberties campaigns since 2007, since the time when RCTV got its license taken away by Chavez. And if we think about the amount of damage that Chavez government and its successor government have done to the people through literally stealing their wealth, it's extraordinary. When you had a cup of coffee in Caracas cost 450 bolivars one year, then 4,500 the next year, then 1.4 million the next year. What you're watching is the vaporization of lower middle class wealth, right? Because the rich figured out ways around this. They could even take loans out from the bank and then watch those loans disappear. So for some people, hyperinflation was great, but for most people, it's been a total disaster. And that's why you have the world's largest refugee crisis is now unbelievably in Latin America, in Venezuela, where there's millions and millions who fled, right? The thing is, Bitcoin is like a wrinkle in all of this. I mean, this is a photo from a couple of years ago when the Venezuelan government was trying to block aid from coming into the country, right? And, it's quite effective, right? Except what you don't see are the millions of Bitcoin going back and forth, that this highway, this construct can no longer stop. And that's why we're at this incredible moment in time where governments really are losing their control over the monetary system. And maybe in the EU and in the US and in Japan, maybe that's been a relatively good thing. You can make that case that they've done a good job and that the dollar is a hot commodity and people want it. And the dollar has been run well. Okay, a lot of people would disagree, but let's just take that for a second. None of these other currencies that I'm talking about have been run well at all. No one could argue they have, whether it's the Bolivar or the Naira or the Real or the Peso. I mean, the Lira, these currencies have been destroyed, right? So not everybody gets to live in the EU and the US, right? And as Nassim Nicholas Taleb has said, it does give us that insurance policy against an Orwellian future, both against the destruction of our savings and our freedom, and also against our this growing surveillance state. So last summer in Hong Kong, if you think about again the social function of cash, Hong Kongers would line up in these queues to use cash to buy Metro cards, so that the authorities and their schoolmasters couldn't know where they were going, right? If they used their card hooked up to their ID the authorities could figure out where they're going. Well, they were like lining up to use cash to protect themselves. But in 20 years, the children of these people won't have paper money. So what are they going to do, right? So I think that Bitcoin can help people transact without permission, without leaving behind such a big digital footprint. We're trying to make ourselves as small as possible on the internet, right? And if we want to fight Big Brother, I think decentralized money is key. If Bitcoin fails, the Wechat model that I described will win. So it's very important that we work together on this project, because if Bitcoin survives and thrives, humans will have money that can't be censored by authorities, that can't be devalued by governments, that can't be monopolized by corporations, that can't be easily mass surveilled, that can't be stopped by borders, and that can be accessed by anyone. It is our humanitarian defense system. And in the future, there will be state money. There will always be fiat money. There will be corporate money. There will always be corporate money, but at least we'll have the people's money. Thank you very much.